It's wonderful to have everyone here. Today's a very, very special day. Today is Lag BaOmer. And Lag BaOmer is the 33rd day of the Omer. So we count, as the Torah tells us, to count 7 complete weeks, 49 days from the second day of Passover, second day of Pesach, until Shavuos. And we are doing this counting as a preparation for Shavuos, for the receiving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. That we know that God Almighty, when He gave the Torah on Mount Sinai, it was had an effect and is a message that meant to reach the entire world. To reach the entire world, it says the Talmud says that when God Almighty spoke on Mount Sinai, the words were split instantaneously into 70 languages. So this preparation of Sfiras HaOmer is really also a preparation that applies to every single human being. There's a number of different aspects of it. One is a preparation for Shavuos. What preparation do we really need? So we come out of exile, out of the bondage of Egypt, and we're shown the way for all humanity that it's possible, no matter how deep their bondage is, to go out of that exile. But how's it possible to go to that exile? It's possible because God Almighty wants that. The exile is a state of affairs that's meant to propel us to the redemption. So when a person finds himself constrained in whatever aspect is spiritual matter or mental matter, emotional matter, physical matter, whatever the constraints are, that one has to realize that that's the point is to the fact that you feel the constraint is already a good thing. If you're in a situation you don't feel that there's a constraint, then a person's in even greater trouble. Imagine a person that grew up in a dark cell underground and thinks that that's all that exists. He thinks this is it. He's not even sure that he doesn't even aware that there's something he's supposed to long for. Maybe he hears rumors that there's a world, beautiful sunlight and beautiful things to do and experience to serve God Almighty and serve his fellow human being, but he doesn't know about it. So he thinks that that's what there is. If you have a person who's sitting in jail in a cell, he's been put in a cell in a dungeon, and he's in pain from the fact that he's limited, he can't move around, he can't get out, he can't see his family, it's dark, and so forth, then he's a big step, he thinks he's in tremendous difficulty, and he is in that sense, but he's a big step ahead of the guy who doesn't know that there is any other existence. He's in the same cell, but he thinks that this is it. So you have to realize that the pain is an awakening of the realization that there's something much greater that's possible. And that greater that's much possible could be right there where you are. And that's why we are meant to see that there's nothing besides God Almighty in the very moment, in the very situation that we're in. So this is a message for every single human being. This is what the Torah is coming into the world to show us the path. That this is the reality that we have. Every human being has this ability, this reality to be taken out of by God Almighty, out of whatever limitations they're in, and to realize that the way out of any physical slavery is, first of all, you have to be coming out of spiritual slavery. And that's something that we have to constantly remind ourselves when we find ourselves at our physical limitations. Then the physical consequences around us and within us are as a result of spiritual slavery, the way that we're thinking. And we're actually creating these boundaries around us, boundaries and limitations of possibilities. Because for God Almighty, there is no limitations to the possibilities. God Almighty is propelling us towards each one of us individually and his families and his couples and his families. It's propelling us towards what is possible, which is there is no limitations. We're able to the greatest extent of what a human being is able to accomplish. We're able to accomplish it all, not because we're so strong, but because God Almighty intends that for us. He's propelling us with that energy and that drive. So the 7 weeks our preparation for receiving the Torah because we have all kinds of twists and turns in our thinking and our emotions that divert us from using this divine energy for the divine purpose with which it's intended. And we can make life overcomplicated, get lost in all kinds of twists and turns in our thinking, and don't know how to direct the emotions that God Almighty gifts us with to be in full service of God Almighty, to be in full service of our fellow human being, and to be in really full service of ourselves, to be able to bring ourselves to the forefront. It's very interesting. You think about it, the commandments, we know that there's consequences for not fulfilling the commandments. So a person could think that this God Almighty has divine wisdom. We're learning with Rabbi Yonasan Steif's holy work, Mitzvos Hashem. God Almighty's loving divine guidance for every single human being. And a person could begin to think, one second here, all these laws, do this and don't do this, and there's consequences for each one of these things. That God Almighty has a scorecard, and He is keeping track. People have a conception of a God that's looking to trip them up and punish them and so forth. All false conceptions taught by foreign ideologies of what God Almighty is. People misunderstand. They don't understand. Their inheritance is stolen from them by false portrayals of God Almighty. So what we have to understand is that the real scorecard is inside of us. When we conduct ourselves according to what God Almighty is lovingly guiding us through the Torah on how to conduct ourselves, we are actually opening the possibility. We're maximizing the potential for us to be who we really are. Because you might say, one second, a person stealing. Okay, stealing is a crime. God Almighty says, do not steal. It applies to every single human being. So you might say, if you're going to take a dollar that doesn't belong to you, or a penny that doesn't belong to you, it's a crime against the person you stole from. And you're going to say it's a crime against God. Because you're denying God Almighty by saying that you can't have enough. You don't have what you need, and you need to take this from someone else. Can't rely on what God Almighty has given you. You need to readjust the wealth, so to speak. Right? What's the whole concept of Marxism and the cult of scarcity? Is to say, the way God distributed the wealth for today is not acceptable in their eyes, and therefore they're going to redistribute the wealth. So that's basically a person who steals is redistributing the wealth in a small measure for his own direct benefit. The Marxist claims he's doing it for everyone else's benefit. But the person who's stealing for himself, he's not claiming to do it for everyone's benefit. He's doing it for his own benefit. So, and it's true. It's a crime against the other person. It's a crime against God. But even more so, it's a crime against yourself. Not that you would do it, but each one of us has, applying this to everything. It's a crime against yourself, because what happens is, what led to the theft is a constrained view of reality, a constrained view of who you are. You no longer see yourself as being created by God Almighty with unlimited love at every instant, with every single thing that you need. You see yourself as disconnected from God Almighty, and therefore you have to take matters into your own hands, and you're going to get this $5 from this other guy and redistribute it to yourself. You've just disconnected yourself from the reality of who you really are. Now you're not disconnected in truth, you're just not seeing the truth. So when you realize that and stop yourself from stealing, or if you stole something, you return it to the other person, what you're really doing is you're recorrecting, you're re awakening yourself to the reality, and now you lift from yourself that cloud, that haziness, um, that misperception, and now you can see things correctly. So who is benefiting the most? The guy who got his $5 back? Well, he appreciates it. But it's interesting that it's forbidden to steal even the smallest amount, where the returning the money or the refraining from stealing or the returning the money has no effect on the other person's bottom line. One of the tragedies of the times is people say, "Oh, it's okay to steal from the insurance companies. It's okay to steal from this person. It's okay to shoplift a little bit." Why? Because these companies are so big. These insurance companies are billion-dollar companies. It doesn't really matter. It's the person going to say if you take a few $1,000s here or there and steal the money, put in a false claim for your insurance claim. And the answer is, in one sense, it doesn't make a difference because the insurance company, it's the thousands of dollars that you're stealing from the insurance companies is within the margin of counting errors that they have. Not the person could enter a few dollars here or there wrong, and that's already tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars mistakes, and there's margins of errors, and they build into the actuarial calculations the false claims. What percentage of people are going to build false claims? So they're already collecting the premiums, taking into account that people are, going to be filing false claims. What's the average number of claims? It includes the false claims. What's the size of the claims? So the reality is, to the bottom line, to the experience, did they lose or win this year? Did they make a profit or loss? The person stealing is not going to make a difference. And if the person steals an item from a store, first of all, the store might not even notice. And if they do notice the amount, that $40 thing a person stole, or even a $500 thing a person stole, in the grand scheme of things, seems completely insignificant. And when you then take if you had one owner of the item, you stole his knapsack, and he definitely lost it. But if you have in the corporate structure, in the last couple hundred years, the creation of the corporate structure where there's shareholders, it could be millions of shareholders. So the actual loss per ownership unit of that store is $40 divided by millions, the amount of personal loss to each one of those shareholders. Even if it's accurately recorded the loss, the $40 drop in assets of that company because the person stole it is so diluted that the actual effect is less than any measurable number. So those that encourage this thievery, they say, listen, that running shoe that's on the shelf, now instead of sitting on the shelf and belonging to some rich company, belongs to a guy who could use it. But who's suffering the most? The guy who stole it. Because he's bought into a whole worldview that's really connected to idolatry, theft, idolatry, all related, because all the commandments are related. Because when a person denies that there's anything besides God Almighty, he starts to think, oh, there is a lack over here. Or he could do whatever he wants, even if he's not lacking anything. He could take what he wants, to experience what he wants, because he's afraid he's not going to have the experience if he doesn't do it. Take it in this unauthorized way. Who's suffering the most? The thief is suffering the most because he's bought into a falsehood. And now he's walking around with the weight of this realization that he's bought into a lie about himself. And even if he's high potty about it and he does it regularly and he doesn't feel any sense of remorse, he's trained himself to not feel guilty. He's still suffering the consequences of walking around in a crooked view of the world and crooked view of himself, a crooked view of God Almighty, crooked view of his relationship to other human beings. He may walk in with a great bravado to steal it, but at the same time, he is not in real relationship with the other people. So this is why God Almighty gives us the commandments. And the interesting thing is, this is why God Almighty is waiting for the return of every single person to do tshuva, to return to God Almighty. How is it that God Almighty could forgive all these things? You're thinking he's standing with a scorecard. You come back, you turn around your life and you say, oh my God, I've been thinking about things the wrong way, thinking about myself the wrong way. I want to live a different life. I want to live according to what God Almighty wants. You've been taught in order to help keep you person on the wrong track is God Almighty's got his scorecard there. So who wants to come back now and say, I'm sorry, what you stole this and you didn't say this thing, nice thing, and you didn't do this and you didn't do that. All these things that you didn't do. And each one of us has a list. Could have done, didn't do. And the truth of the matter is, God Almighty, the greatest joy is when the highlight of his creation, which is a human being, created in his God Almighty's divine image, turns around his life with God Almighty's divine assistance to now serve God Almighty. So what happened to the list? Why is there this joyous embrace? Because the person is returning to himself. There's no greater joy than when someone sees, when the person experiences who he really is, when he experiences that he's never been separated from God Almighty, there is no list anymore. The list is not there being used against him as a battering ram or something to give him a certain number of smacks because he's turned around he's now sees the reality. That's the greatest joy for the creator who's giving him the existence it created in God Almighty's divine image, that now this person recognizes the divine in him. So yes, does he have to repay this and make amends here? And these things are necessary, but that's part of the humility of taking responsibility for the things he made when he had a mistaken perception. But there's no blockage to his returning to God Almighty. The return is not being held back by the list. The more he makes the amends and he makes the repairs, he will lighten his own load. His back will be straighter. His eyes will shine greater. So, Sfiras HaEmer is this process of going through each one of our emotional attributes and recognizing that there are ways and times and ways in which the emotional way that we act is disproportionate. It's out of whack. There has to be a balance. We're colorful people. We have many different colors of love, discipline, moving forward towards a person, pulling back. We have the compassion. There's judgment. There's compassion. There's so many different emotions, and really, it comes out there's 49 central combinations of those. And our job in Sfiras HaEmer is to focus on each one of those and to bring each one of them to shine. Sfira is from the word for sapphire, for sapphire. So the same word, really. One is like a verb to sapphirize, so to speak, to cause to shine the all these attributes. And in each moment in time, a different one is brought to the forefront. And we learn to not be afraid of them. And we learn how to bring each one of them into the service of God Almighty. And how to correct the fallout that's caused when we are not using those in the service of God Almighty. When we're grabbing for something where we're angry or we're frustrated or we're too loving at the wrong time in the wrong place to the wrong person, that's also something we need to correct. So this is what Sirius Aimer is about. So it comes out in the midst of all this is Lag BaOmer. And Lag BaOmer is the day of the passing of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was one of the great Torah sages of all time. One of the surviving Talmidim, Rabbi Akiva. And the entire Torah that we have today is a gift that came through Rabbi Akiva and through his Talmidim, his students. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is one of the greatest of them, that he revealed not only many different aspects, as every chapter of the Oral Torah has teachings of Rabbi Shimon, which is thousands of pages, and he also revealed the Pnimius of the Torah, the internal aspect of the Torah. He's the author of the Holy Zohar. And the teachings, the bringing to the forefront the greatness of every single human being, the accessibility of this greatness of every single human being. And the Gemara Brachas, the Talmud, Tractate Brachas, on the 28th page in the first side, relates a story of a crisis that occurred in the Beis Medrash, in the Hall of Torah study. We don't have the time to tell the whole story, but there was the leader of the generation was Rabbi Gamliel, and he followed a position, a very principled position, that the only people that could come and study in the halls of Torah study was someone who his insides were the same as his exterior. So a person comes dressed, looking like a Torah observant Jew, study Torah. Is he really inside that way? He had like a spiritual detector that was able to determine a whole system set up to make sure that people could not come in unless they were as lucid inside as they appeared on the outside. So a whole conflict was in a day. He was deposed, and there was a massive upheaval, and a new leader was put in his place. And what that caused, it was nullified this approach. And then now anybody could come into the house of Torah study and contribute and to receive, to learn, and to contribute. In fact, this is one of the things that saved in the times of upheaval of the Roman conquest of the Holy Land. One of the things that saved the Torah teachings is because many people had teachings that they had received from their fathers and grandfathers and from their teachers and so forth, but they were disqualified from coming into the house of study, so they weren't able to share what they knew. And when the approach was nullified, and now they could come in, now whole teachings that had been excluded from the Torah study halls were now brought in. The people were able to come in and provide testimony of what the Torah teachings that they had heard. And this added tremendously to the continuation of the Torah, the transmission of the Torah from generation to generation. So who was the student in the Torah study hall who instigated this overthrowing of the viewpoint that It's an exclusive admission system and brought about a change that everyone could come in. That was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So the Talmud tells us, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he's the student, the Talmud, that provoked knowingly. He created the conflict in order to bring about the overthrow of the prior way of setting a standard for who's admissible and bringing about the great opening of who could come in. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was both responsible for the massive increases in the study of Torah by teaching, and the increase of his teachings, both in the revealed aspects of the Torah and in the hidden aspects of the Torah. And he was also directly responsible for the massive increase in the reach by inviting in everybody was now able to come in to the house of Torah study. Of course, everyone has to work on themselves that their interior should match their exterior, but the reality is everyone's interior already matches or even supersedes their exterior, because the inherent existence of every single person is the goodness, it is the divine. So that's already there. That's what he was bringing to the forefront. Because a person is confused inside with distracting thoughts and distracting emotions, is not a reflection of who they really are. That inherently, every single person is exactly what they are, created in God Almighty's divine image. That's the reality of every person. And that's what we see in everybody. Not the wacky thoughts that they're entertaining and fomenting, and even the wacky actions that they're doing, even those that are completely against what God Almighty wants. On the contrary, we look to see who they really are and help redirect them to who they really are, that they can then have a life that is the greatest joy, which is bringing the divine drive, the divine energy in them to the forefront, to its full expression. Because what we're saying before, that the person, when he steals, so now he's created a ceiling on himself. He's created a twisted environment in himself, inside of himself. So what's happening is that the divine drive that is propelling him through life with all kinds of tremendous, incredible, beautiful blessings intended for him, that he's diverting himself from that. And it's a tragedy. So the person who's suffering the most is the person himself. And all it takes is that change of recognition of who he really is to recognize that that drive could come and express itself to the fullest. So really, what are the commandments? The commandments are that the divine drive in each one of us, the drive train, so to speak, with the torque and with the entire ability to propel us through life, that should come to its fullest expression. The fullest expression of that comes to keeping the Torah and the mitzvahs that apply to each person. And that's what we can remember. That's what we have to keep ourselves in mind. And when we make a twist or a turn from that, the entire situation becomes completely upside down on a personal level and on a general level. And we could see that in the Lag BaOmer, since we're talking about Lag BaOmer, a situation in the Holy Land where there's people who control the transportation system and control the military and control the people. And they said that Meron, which is the place, the resting place of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, where he said people should come and they should celebrate. So one of the celebrations, we make bonfires and we sing and dance, and in the great joy of the lifetime of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his contribution to the entire mission of God Almighty in creating this incredible world, an incredible human being in his divine image. So people go to Meron, one of the central places where bonfires are held is in Meron in Israel, the north of Israel. So it was declared this year that it's a war zone and people cannot go. So if you think about it for a second, They make it sound like this is for national security, it's for people's safety, but it's really the twisted consequence of the perversion of the use of human thought to actually create an attempt to extinguish the light. Now, the light is not extinguishable because it's a divine light. In the light of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, there's only 30 people there lighting a fire instead of 30,000 people. It's not going to stop Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's power of his teachings, and his welcoming everybody is not going to be affected by that. But it's an attempt to try to dampen people's spirits. If you think about it for a second, the entire enterprise of creating the whole concept of Zionism is to say that to misdirect the Jewish people to say that they're done with God, done with the holiness of the Torah, done with the holiness of the Jewish people. They're just going to have a land to defend themselves from all the hostile nations out there, which is another lie that Zionism teaches. And they created a whole structure that, in the end of the day, not only does it deny God, and not only does it deny the Torah and deny the holiness of the Jewish people, but in fact, it can't even defend people against the supposed threats, to such an extent that they have to close down one of the central celebrations of the year of the children of Israel. The government tries to shut it down in order to establish its authority of its twisted worldview that the world is a hostile place. B, that because the world is a hostile place, therefore it's necessary to create, fund, and foment basis for people to create warfare against the children of Israel. And therefore, but it can't be stopped. So therefore, the only way to stop they can't stop Hezbollah in Lebanon anymore, because they already abandoned Lebanon in 2000 and allowed the creation of bases for Hezbollah, turning over the Israeli bases to Hezbollah for them to use as bases to establish 250,000 missiles directed against the children of Israel. And then they say that those who claim to be responsible for the security of the children of Israel then turn around and say they can't actually stop them anymore. The only thing they do is stop the children of Israel from rejoicing at the place of the resting place of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So you could see the twistedness of this entire situation. It's twisted beyond twisted. And people are still convinced that these people who hold themselves out to be in a position of responsibility are somehow doing something that's in their best interest. But don't see that I mean, it's not funny, it's so tragic, but the encroachment of this danger, quote unquote danger, into the dwelling places of the children of Israel is increasing. So now people are displaced from the south, and people are displaced from the north, and people can't go to here and there, all because of a Marxist ideology that's taken hold of the imagination of some people, the children of Israel, presenting itself as something good. People are going to now be protected from the Jewish people will take matters into their own hands instead of relying on God Almighty to protect the children of Israel, as He has for thousands of years. And from now on, there's going to be an army to do that. And except that we see that the end result of that way of thinking, tragically, is that people are being subscribed into a system that the army can't protect the people. The army cannot protect even its own soldiers. And daily, and soldiers are losing their lives. May God Almighty protect every human being. Losing their lives because of the insanity of the crooked thinking. While the same structure is funding the terrorists and refueling the terrorists, they're also sending wonderful people out to die in a battle against the terrorists. And they're not given the proper permission to fight the terrorists. And the end result is tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. So we're in a situation of apparent insanity. So our job is not to allow that in any way to affect us. If they want to suppress the excitement and the joy of the children of Israel for thousands of years going to the resting place of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, these are people who don't believe, they fight against God. I mean, they believe internally in God. Everyone is internally has a soul, but their day-to-day effort is to, and their day-to-day thinking is a subscription to an ideology that wars against God Almighty, wars against the Torah, wars against the holiness of the Jewish people, and wars against the holiness of the Holy Land, while at the same time flying a flag that claims to be for the Holy Land. But if you see what they actually say, they don't believe in the holiness of the land. So this is the tragedy of our times. The tragedy has been enveloping the children of Israel for the last 140 years. And the consequences of that tragedy are going more and more deaths by the increasing. So there's more deaths now than there was under the British mandate and under the Ottoman Empire. May God Almighty protect every single person. So if they want to repress now in service of their creation of a war to scare the children of Israel, they're also going to suppress the joyous experience of coming to Meron to rejoice in the Yom Hilula, the great day of the passing of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So there's only one answer. The joy has to increase. And if they establish soldiers there to use out the soldiers to prevent Jewish people from coming to a holy place of the Jewish people, to send soldiers in and uproot Hezbollah, that they don't do, but to prevent Jewish people, to uproot a festival of the Jewish people, that they have plenty of soldiers for. So our job is to now, that joy has to break out in every place in the world. It's kind of like you suppress something in one place and it's going to expand everywhere else. That's what our job is. That every place, you have to make every place Meron, so that every human being is included in that joy, of that, the joy of recognition that there is God Almighty put into the world. Human beings that the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that care about every other human being. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai cared about every single human being. His whole life was a drive, a divine drive to bring to the awareness of every human being the divine that's within them. So we can't stand by idly, but we also can't waste our time complaining about what other people are doing and sighing and saying, oh, that's the kind of people they are. We have to increase in the joy of the Yom Tov. We have to ask ourselves where in the crookedness in our own thinking. Haid Shebahid is the Sphira. So we said there's seven spheres and seven emotional attributes and seven emotional. When they're combined, you have the aspect of each one within each one. So it comes to 49, 7 times 7. So Haid Shebahid is it's also translated the splendor, but it's the ability to overcome external obstacles. Netzach is overcoming internal obstacles. Haid is overcoming external obstacles. So, and Netzach is endurance. That's your ability to keep going no matter what the circumstances are. And Haid is your ability to overcome the external obstacles. So it's apropos that we're talking about Haid Shebahaid. We're talking about the overcoming the external obstacles, even though we see things around us that disturb us and we can't imagine that they're happening. But our job is to follow the example of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was thriving at the times that the Romans were destroying the world, because he was not affected by the external obstacles. He spent 13 years in a cave with his son, fleeing a death sentence from the Romans because he pointed out that all the fancy buildings and all the aqueducts and all the wonderful innovations of the Romans in the Holy Land were meant for their own aggrandizement and not meant in the service of God Almighty. And because that someone squealed on him and informed on him, and they ended up fleeing and living for 13 years in a mountain cave, miraculously provided for by God Almighty. So he didn't go into a place of despair, bitterness, upset. He used those 13 years to learn Torah nonstop and to bring out and reveal even greater depths of the Torah. And not only to reveal those depths of the Torah for himself, but to realize and to propel forward the mission to bring that to the awareness of every person. He didn't just have a good experience for himself, but when all those insights that he had then became a gift for every person. So that's what today is. Today is this tremendous recognition of that the well springs of the Torah need to reach every single human being, that we have the strength to do it. We can't be distracted. No one else is going to do it for us. Some people are busy fighting a war, funding the war, funding both sides of the war. Some people are busy funding the terrorists. Some people are otherwise busy trying to rally themselves to fight the terrorists that their own government's funding. All kinds of crazy situations are going on. None of those people are distracted, or whatever their position is, whatever they think they're doing. They're distracted from the real point. The real point is we have to bring the message of God Almighty to every single human being. And our job is not to get into the politics of it. Our job is not to get into the warfare mentality of it, but rather to see that the true mission is the true war of God Almighty. The true war is bringing the message of God Almighty to every single human being. Not creating defensive postures and impenetrable domes that are not really impenetrable. And all these kind of mythologies that end off people just becoming more isolated and more hardened in their isolation from the mission. Because it's all the us against them mentality, which is the opposite of what the Torah says. The Torah says, no, it's no us against them. There is a mission that has to be accomplished, and every human being has to be subscribed to it. There is no them. Even Amalek, who commits himself to fighting against God Almighty and erasing the knowledge of God Almighty from the world and erasing the divine image from the world, which is a war against every human being, even he has the opportunity to do tshuva and accept the Sheva Mitzvahs Ben Enoch, accept the laws that God Almighty has given to every human being lovingly. Even Amalek. So even Amalek, at the same time that you know that you have to unrelentingly deflect the taxes Amalek, but even Amalek, you have to see through his own facade that he's convinced himself that he has to fight against God Almighty. You have to see through that and see that he too is reachable. He too can change his course. And that's the great gift of Lag BaOmer. That's the great gift of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that he gave us this gift to realize and to see things as they really are, starting with ourselves. When we can start with ourselves and realize and see and identify and deflect all the thoughts that come to deflect us. It's like when you have that voice inside of you says, do this thing, call this, here's an idea, let's do this. And you're like, I don't know, I can't, what are people going to say? And I don't have time, and I don't have this, and all these kind of things. This is the deflection of the divine energy. Everyone has a list of people who are the big boogeymen of threats to them and to society and to humanity and civilization. But the biggest challenge inside of us is the thoughts that limit us and deflect us from accomplishing what we can accomplish in our own selves, in our own relationships, in our marriages, with our children, with our communities, with the world as a whole. And that's really what Rabbi Steif put his whole life into, bringing to everyone the awareness of who they really are. That's why he wrote this sefer. We spent today talking about Lag BaOmer. We'll continue next week learning inside, but it's so important to reflect on where we're up to, that we're up to recognizing that this mission is unfolding. It's unfolding, and on one hand, you know, it's it's not it's necessary for us to do the work, but like it says in Pirkei Avos, it's not upon us to finish the work. Why? Because the work is happening, because every human being has built into them this innate awareness of who they really are. It's not like you have to go. You got a fence, and the fence is supposed to be white, and the white fence, the paint peeled off. And now you have to go repaint it. And if you can't get to the fence, then the fence is not going to be painted. That's how the things work in the physical world. But when it comes to the spiritual that's in the divine in every single human being, it's constantly bursting to the surface. It's as if the 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 paint, the fence is, if to take the metaphor, it's meant to be white on the outside, but it gets gray and the paint peels off. So you're trying to get to the paint. You're not trying to cover it up with white paint. You're trying to tell the fence, you're trying to bring out the whiteness from within the fence. Let the fence come out with its own whiteness. But at the very time while we're getting our act together and trying to get to that fence, the fence itself is bursting out with its internal whiteness, what it really is. So it's turning white by itself. That's what's going on in the world. And our job is to pay attention to that, to see that that's the real unfolding of the redemption. Real unfolding of the redemption is that every human being is going to be guided to this, what's in them. And why does Zechariah 8 in chapter 8, verse 23 say that 10 from among the nations, the languages of the nations, are going to come to each one of the children of Israel and say that, we know God Almighty is with you, show us the way, take us with you. It's because when you realize that, when you have that internal awareness, you're going to say, oh, so who's already maybe a little bit more experienced than me in how to maximize this? And that's why they'll come and they'll demand to learn from the children of Israel, because children of Israel will be carrying the teachings that help every human being maximize who they really are. So just like metaphorically, if you understand that you have an innate musical talent, and you really that calls to you the violin. So what's really calling to you is not the instrument. Calling the instrument is an externality. The instrument, what it represents, is that there's that voice which the violin represents, which is unique. It's not a clarinet, and it's not a saxophone, and it's not a cello, and it's not any of these other drums. But when you realize that, that's what you say. Okay, well, who already knows how to bring this voice out from inside themselves? I want to learn from them. So you find a violin teacher. And the violin teacher guides you how to express this singing voice inside you through the use of the violin. There's a wooden box and a few strings and some horsehair. That's how you're now bringing that out. That what voice is really inside of you. So this is a metaphor, which every metaphor is imperfect, but understand that every human being is going to say, I hear the voice inside of me that wants to live according to God Almighty, because I want to live out this divine drive that's in me. Not because I want to have something outside of me. Yes, it's true, having a beautiful, stable civilization is an awesome thing, and having peace and having harmony and having prosperity and abundance and health and all these things that come as a reflection of our own internal connection with God Almighty. All those things are beautiful. All those things are awesome. All those things everyone wants that. But even greater than all those external representations of the divine inside of us, even greater is the experience of living in integrity with the divine inside of us, of making choices, of speaking lovingly, of deflecting thoughts that would bring us to speak unlovingly. that would get us into off track and disrupt our relations. All those things are the gifts of our own internal self coming to the forefront. There's no greater gift than that. When a person when a person performs their violin piece, the person is really in touch with what drove them in the first place. Is it that there's a standing ovation? Is it that they mastered the technology of this wooden box with a few pieces of string and a few horsehairs? Is that they mastered that? Or is that what's the joy? The joy is that that voice that they wanted to express inside of them that came out to the forefront. And that is the great joy. And that's actually what people are applauding for. And that's why if you understand musical expression, you can tell the difference between the person who's a technical person and a person who really is coming from the heart. So because you see or hear the song that the person is bringing out. So the same thing is over here that we will experience in each one of us in our lives. That when you know that there's God Almighty is driving you, and if you can listen to the voice of that drive and understand where the drive is taking you and deflect any thoughts that take you away from that drive, then that is what redemption looks like. And all the external manifestations, the beauty, the harmony in the home, the harmony among the family, the prosperity, the health that comes all from this internal shift, the internal release, really, basically what we're doing. We have this power train in us. We have this drive train in us. It's we don't have to do anything to propel it. We don't have to do anything. We just have to follow the divine prompts. We don't have to figure it out. We don't have to come up with a plan for it. We don't have to know in advance what it is. We don't have to train for it. It's the things that we have to do. We don't have to train for it. Because God is going to guide us every step, what to do, how to do, what to say right now. The training comes into training ourselves, this building the spiritual muscle to deflect all the things that will come inside of us, the voice, the thoughts, the don't do this, don't follow that divine inspiration. We have to practice that spiritual muscle. But as we go along, we're always practicing that because we always come back to what the divine message is. So that's available, my friends, to every single human being. It's available to each one of us right now, each one of you right now. And we are that's just invested in who we are because God Almighty is creating us lovingly at every moment. So that is the call of Lag BaOmer. Call of Lag BaOmer to listen to that voice and just to trust that voice, take action based on that voice. We don't ask if it's possible. We don't ask how it's possible. We just go ahead and do it. And I'll share at the end now a story I heard just yesterday on Shabbos of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That there was a fellow that came from Europe, and he survived the Holocaust. His whole family was wiped out, and God Almighty protect every person. And he came to the Holy Land, and he got injured, and he was lying in a hospital bed, paralyzed. He got it shot, and I guess it entered his spine. He was paralyzed. He was able to speak, but he couldn't move. So he was lying in the hospital bed, and a friend came and visited him. And this man said to the friend, he says, can you do me a favor? It's Lag BaOmer is coming up, and his dream in Europe was to go to the resting place, to Meron, to the Zion of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And that was always his dream, to go there. And now here he is paralyzed. He has no family. He has not able to get married and have children. And but he wants to be able to fulfill his dream to go to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So he was in a hospital. And so the friend said to the hospital, it's have to This guy needs fresh air. How's he going to get him out of the hospital? The guy's paralyzed. He's restricted to a bed. How's he going to get him? So he comes with an excuse. He says he needs fresh air. He's going to take him for 2 days. Iran is like, it takes a day to get there. In the old days, now it's like 3 hours. But from Jerusalem, the holy city, take a whole day in the old days. And he says to the hospital staff, he's going to take his friend out for fresh air for 2 days. He's going to bring him back. So, okay, somehow they convince the hospital staff to get him in the car and the truck, and they drive him all the way up to Meiron, and they drop him off over there. And the friend leaves and goes on whatever he was taking care of, and he leaves his friend in the gravesite of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. After 2 days, they come back, or a day they come back, and the guy's gone. Like, what happened? Did he disappear? Did he get kidnapped? What kind of tragedy? Where did he disappear to? So they're looking around, and suddenly they realize that this friend that they dropped off there, the paralyzed guy, is standing, and he's praying at the tomb of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Standing up, he's praying. So they're like, "What? What's going on over here?" So they asked him what happened. He says, "Listen." He came into the gravesite of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He said he had a conversation with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He said, "Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, my whole life, he longed to come to Meiron to be by the gravesite of Shimon Bar Yochai." He says, here he is now. He went through every terrible thing in life. Now, not only did he lose his whole family, but now he lost the ability to even walk, to be able to move, to be able to bring children, to get married and bring children to the world. And it can't be. Just this is not how it's supposed to be. And he's saying to the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, because it says in the Talmud, it says v'shasa dachak, the times of pressure and times of difficulty, we could rely on Shimon Bar Yochai. What does it mean? It means to say that the soul of this person is still concerned about everybody, and will intercede in the divine realms to bring about a positive result for everyone that recognizes it's not just you're going to you're going to go talk to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but and he's going to do something for you. No, it's when you recognize that the answer lies in the whole life story, the whole mission of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, of bringing the message of the Torah to every single human being. That therein lies the answer for whatever dachak, whatever pressure you're under right now. That's where your answer lies. So when you can rely on Shimon Bar Yochai, is that you can rely on that he's setting the example, and you could by so to speak turning to him, you're now unleashing his example within yourself too. So he said, as he's having this conversation, he starts to feel tingling in his fingers. He's like, "Oh my gosh, what's going on?" Now we know a person's paralyzed. Tingling is a very good thing. It's a good sign. So he's able to move his hands, and all of a sudden his legs are he's able to stand up, and he's able to walk. So this is the power of what is possible when a person stops asking if, stops asking how. Because the way they train people today in the medical world and the whole secular thinking is, look, it's not possible. A person has a severed spinal cord. It can't possible. But one second, there is no thing as not possible. In God Almighty's world, it is possible for the spinal cord to heal itself. Not heal itself, God Almighty will heal it. But the divine energy, the divine that flows through us. And by the way, it's found it's through our entire bodies, its entire existence. Our soul is infusing our entire existence. But the power of that divine through that wants to go through the spinal cord to propel the entire body, the person doesn't buy into the idea that it's cut and it's limited and it can't and it's no longer and it can't be repaired. All those stories, and he sees He's crazy enough, so to speak, transcends all the limitations to have a conversation and say it should be otherwise. It should be complete and it should be able to propel into the world. Then the spinal cord will heal. And that's this. I heard this from Rabbi Shane and Tenafly, the story yesterday. And it's a beautiful, beautiful way to end our learning here today, to understand what's possible for each one of us and everyone in our own lives. Understand the greatness of what's possible for each one of us. And that when we learn from the examples of the great Torah sages like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, we can see, we can follow the role model of living beyond any limitations, living beyond the limitations of our mind, the limitations of our emotions, the limitations of our bodies. That's what we're capable of. Not because we're capable of, because God Almighty is giving us that capability. And He is driving that capability in us. And there's nothing more than He wants is for us to bring all that capability to the service of God Almighty and to the service of our fellow human being. So thank you very much for being here today. We'll continue, God willing, next week. And it's really beautiful to see everybody. Have a beautiful week and a good Yom Tov. Happy Lag BaOmer.